I'm Greer Campbell. I'm a senior leadership consultant here at IHHP. I've been with the organization now for almost 13 years, and I manage our emotional intelligence practice. And today I've got with me Marcie Stern. Marcie is one of our facilitators here at IHHP and has a breadth of experience and knowledge of our actual foundational science of emotional intelligence content. And today we're going to have a chat about her experiences and why she feels emotional intelligence is an essential component to leadership development in organizations. Marcie, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Greer, and thank you for the opportunity to share my experience on a topic that I feel very passionate about. So I come to IHHP with, as Greer mentioned, a wide background. It covers two different careers. I started in hospital administration, and then I transitioned into leadership coaching, leadership development, workshop facilitation, and I've been doing that work for about 20 years now. And I have had experiences in a number of different organizations, from nonprofit, private equity, Fortune 100, a voluntary health organization, and even running my own business. So a lot of experiences there that I bring to my facilitation. And I guess one way to kind of sum up who I am are really my three pillars, and they are positive attitude, purposeful actions, and personal accountability. And those are things that I really believe and try to bring into my personal life and my professional life.
That's amazing. That's great. Thanks, Marcie. That was an excellent introduction. Kind of pales. I mean, mine paled in comparison. So that's awesome. And Marcie, you came to IHHP because you were a client at one point. Is that correct?
Is correct. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I worked at Fortune 100 company that I mentioned. I was working for that company when we started to work with IHHP, and I became a trained, certified internal facilitator. Right. So I went through the program myself as a participant because A, that was required. But B, I think it was really important for me to experience it. If I was going to be a champion of this and I was going to be, incorporating it into our leadership development programs, I needed to really understand and appreciate the content. So it was really a dual purpose for my participation. And what we were experiencing in the organization at the time was an opportunity to address the nice culture that we had. And I recognize that is not too uncommon for other organizations. It was really an opportunity to help our leaders in building their conversation skills, even when it's difficult and you need to give difficult feedback. So we brought the program in. It was part of our a variety of leadership development programs.
Right. And did you deliver it at that time? That would have been prior to the pandemic, obviously. And so I assume most of the delivery was in the classroom. Were you delivering in the classroom?
It was all in the classroom. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Excellent. And what was the impact? How did you feel? Well, first of all, what was the reaction to the content when you started delivering to these groups? Because based on my experience working with clients, they're always worried originally, especially when I started with the organization 13 years ago, the word anything with emotions in it became a bit of a trigger for leaders who were, going into a leadership development program. So tell me a little bit about what that was like in terms of how did you present the content so it didn't feel squishy or kumbaya or something of that nature to the groups?
Yeah, it's a great question. But I have to say that did not seem to be a challenge at our organization.
Yeah.
That said, it certainly helped that this wasn't an HR initiative. We had leaders that really championed the program. And so that would be a recommendation for other clients or other organizations considering bringing this program in, is to have that champion. But that was not a barrier for us. and
Right.
people just experienced it. And, if there were any concerns, they overcame it. And, it's one of those, word of mouth. It just was a fan favorite part of leadership programs. So
Right.
people were asking to be part of the program so they could have the exposure to emotional intelligence.
Right. So I guess through word of mouth, as programs were delivered, people saw the value in it, and then that's I mean, that's one of the things that we feel really strongly about in terms of the content. I'm sure you do too. Is the really sticky language, and that did you start hearing some of that language in the hallways in the organization?
You can guess which
Yeah.
concept I heard most repeated in the hallways. It was the dropping of
Right. I was going to say
markers.
that. I was
Yes.
going to say
I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
that common language was so valuable because people got it. They
Right.
understood, they appreciated, but it also became an opportunity to really build and hold colleagues accountable. So it wasn't
Mm,
just, okay, yes, you may have dropped a couple of
yeah.
markers in that meeting. And how did you handle it? Or what would you have done differently next time? So it really helped to build that culture of accountability, having that common language.
For sure. And so, how were the gaps, the need for emotional intelligence development? How was that identified in the beginning? What gaps were you trying to sort of fill in terms of behaviors?
Well, the organization had designed leadership principles. And so it was
Okay.
embedded within the
Mm,
leadership
right.
principles, within our core values. And then that need for kind of overcoming this nice culture and having those
Mhm.
difficult conversations.
Right. So I feel like it eventually always goes back to feedback or having those difficult conversations, or how we like to say here at HHP, those last 8% conversations. Getting to those, the foundation of EI is really the key to being able to, how we manage our emotions in those moments really makes a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. When I talk to clients, when there are challenges within leadership, especially specific teams, and they've done an engagement survey, the results come back, and it's pretty glaringly seen that it's a leadership issue. There's trouble with leaders, in terms of their behaviors, and and what's also identified pretty clearly is that people wake up every day and don't want to come to work and not show up in a way that represents them. So how do I think EI, and I think our content specifically in terms of, the background in science and the brain science and the interactivity and the activities and the reinforcement, I think really helps bridge that gap for people in terms of that, the building of self-awareness. Did you see any of that?
I would agree. And I would say, when we talk about the gap between intention and impact,
Right.
for me personally, when I went through the program, that was probably one of the biggest takeaways. And
Mhm.
I would say that tends to be a big takeaway for leaders too,
Yeah.
is recognizing, oh, the way in which I think or I want to show up as a leader, others may not be experiencing that. And it's a blind spot. And so when
Totally.
they're open to getting feedback on that blind spot and doing something about that, I feel like that's a real opportunity for some important shifts in their ability as a leader.
Yeah, I think I've obviously sat in many programs, and you see sort of those aha moments when people recognize themselves. I think, you may do this, but I've seen some of our facilitators, talk about the competencies of a leader, and then say to the leaders in the room, think about, is that how you show up? What would your direct reports say about the way you show up in the context of what we're talking about? And I think that's a real aha moment for people sometimes.
It is. I agree. I agree.
Yeah. And it's interesting also in terms of when you brought up the impact, the intention versus impact concept, was a sort of a game changer for you. When I first did the program 13 years ago, it was the exceptional leadership exercise that really did it for me. And that exercise, could you have any any experiences in terms of delivering that exercise?
It's such a fun exercise to
Yeah.
facilitate. You're right. The visual where, people get to see, and whether it's virtual or in the classroom, you still get the sense of that, the impact of emotional intelligence and how it's a differentiator over EI skills or technical skills. It is a very startling, eye-opening recognition and appreciation that participants have.
I think because we all growing up, our value is sort of misplaced in many occasions in terms of, our GPAs or how good we are at what we do instead of, how we show up as human beings. And I think what really, obviously, we know research is really, really clear that, those emotional intelligence foundational skills are much more important in terms of a determination of success, in the workplace, but also at home. And that, I think that's one of the other great things. And you made reference to it earlier in terms of the VP and his marriage. But, all kidding aside, I think those foundational EI competencies are more important at home because those are the relationships that we covet the most and that we should be taking care of the most. So the program itself is fantastic that way. I found when I first did, I had a 16-year-old daughter when I first started the organization. You can imagine. You have children, Marcie? Do you have children?
I have two boys in their 20s
right.
now.
That's right. So, well, you didn't get to experience a teenage girl, but I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, yeah, it was perfect timing when I started with IHHP because I'll never forget my daughter came. She was going out to, one of the first parties she'd been to. She was 16 years old and she came down the stairs and I looked up at her and she was wearing something that, I was like, I said to her, "Aren't you going to be cold?" Of course, you can imagine when we talk about using triggering language.
Right.
Obviously, right away, I shut her down completely. I did, all she heard was judgment in my voice. That's all she heard. Even though I couched it in some, passive aggressive, backhanded way, all she heard was judgment. And it really, now when I reflect on that, it really, it's really all about the foundation of emotional intelligence, and really trying not to use triggering language to try and connect and build relationship in a way where we can build trust. So that was a really good learning for me. Now, there was many more. I mean, we're all human. We all have the same brains. They all work in the same way. So it takes a lot of practice to be able to not, keep going back to those default behaviors. I just love the program because it's so applicable across, the whole being of a person, at home, at work.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I would say, a lot of people feel like it is more challenging at home.
Totally.
Like they can button up and they can, be professional in the work setting, but it is in the home environment where they seem to have the most challenge.
Yeah, and I think because we take those relationships for granted. We know that we're going to be loved in most cases, regardless of what comes out of our mouth in those moments when we're emotionally triggered. So yeah, these the strategies are, the practice in terms of keeping open, not jumping to judgment, all the things we talk about in the program, building the bridge, starting from their side of the bridge and working our way back. All of those concepts are just so valuable. Right. So in terms of sustainment, when we talk about a lot of the clients that I work with, one of the main priorities is, yes, we're going to make this fairly significant expenditure. The budget's not inexpensive in order to bring in a facilitator and deliver our science and emotional intelligence programs. One of the first questions is sustainment. How do we keep the concepts alive? How do we, push it down into the organization? How do we make sure that it's not a one and done? Because we know as learning and development professionals that, a one-day training event is not going to shift, the world in a really significant way. So here at IHHP, We also have our EI 360 assessment, which is a great 360, which is a proprietary 360 tool that we developed. It's based on the 11 competencies of the actual program. And many of our clients do also use that for a deeper dive in terms of self-awareness. We never deliver that 360 without a debrief, a coaching debrief, and sometimes multiple coaching sessions, just to make sure that we put it into context, to make sure that people understand it's a development opportunity and certainly not a punitive thing, because it really is about developing leaders. Because when we promote people into leadership, and maybe you've seen some of this, Marcie, I'm sure you have, the classic example is when we take the, best salesperson in an organization, and all of a sudden they get promoted to be the sales manager, and the organization has not prepared them with the tools to be a leader. So certainly we've seen that many times. And so we want to make sure, and oftentimes that's how our emotional intelligence content is adopted or brought into an organization. Can you speak to that at all? Have you seen that?
Yes. Well, and I appreciate the sustainability question because, yes, as a learning and development professional, we know that one training, a half a day, a full day, is not transformational. So I love that IHHP offers that 360 and other programs to support leaders. So we did incorporate the 360 for a particular, more for the senior leader leadership development program. And our leaders found that extremely valuable, as well as those coaching conversations, the debrief conversation that you mentioned, because left to our own devices, if you're going to get an assessment report, you're going to make up your own interpretation of what things mean. So having that third party, and we talked through it, that some of the programs that I had facilitated included the 360 review, but the additional coaching conversations, I think, is where you can really take that awareness, that insight, and build in that accountability. And so recognizing, okay, here are a couple of things that seem to be a theme among your raters. What's one thing that you want to work on? And it really helps to move the needle in one aspect of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks for that. That's pretty insightful. And I have that experience often with many of our clients, in terms of, especially if it's one particular senior leader who has a huge impact and influence in an organization. One of that just brings to mind, oftentimes we'll have leaders go through the program, and one of the first things they say is, "We love the program. I can leave here today and I can apply the learning, and I think I can really, a lot of my blind spots have been uncovered for me, but I really wish my leader could take it." So we hear that a lot. Yes. So always our recommendation, obviously, is to start at the highest level that you can. Sometimes that's difficult. Oftentimes it's difficult, but that's certainly another recommendation that we would make for sure. Any other sort of thoughts or about emotional intelligence as a leadership competency? From my perspective, from a general statement, I truly, honestly believe, I know I work for an emotional intelligence company, but I truly believe that leadership development, a strategy around leadership development, cannot not include some type of emotional intelligence training or content. What do you feel? How do you feel about that?
Well, of course, you and I are very biased, but yes, I would agree. I think it's honestly, it's just foundational to being a good human.
Totally. Yeah.
I think anybody can benefit. It's a more skillful way of interacting with others and having a more positive, productive, effective interaction with other people. Exactly. And when we're at our best, we're going to inspire others to be at their best. So, whether that is in your personal life or your professional life, whether you're a people leader or a project leader or a leader just within your own domain, coming in with those skills and leveraging those skills will have added benefit, regardless of your role, regardless of your leadership level and responsibilities. And, I'll just add this, it actually just came up the other day. I had a very successful leader ask me, can you really teach emotional intelligence? And then I've also had leaders ask me, can you really be both empathetic and hold people accountable simultaneously? And
good question.
I will say, in full transparency, these questions by these successful leaders really took me by surprise. And, just to your point, it impassions me even more to ensure that emotional intelligence is part of leadership training.
That's right. And how do you answer those questions when you get those?
Well, the quick answer is yes and yes. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. The longer version, you're right. It does take a little bit of explanation to help people understand why. But you're right. They're not exclusive of each other, are they? They're definitely not. Yeah.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes. So I usually respond with some open-ended questions myself.
Yeah, you use your skills very well, for sure. That's awesome. Great. Thank you for joining me, Marcie. I really appreciate it.
It was lovely to talk with you.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you too.